I asked for your hand in marriage. A Percabeth Royal Alternate Universe fanfiction, Part 8. When on Earth had Annabeth learned to shoot archery? She knew everything, sure. But it still startled Percy when she showed off an excellent talent that he had no idea about, yet she had completely perfected. Do not do that. I'd rather you not look like a fool, she snapped sternly. Percy smiled sheepishly at her, relaxing his arm holding the bow slightly. With a huff, Annabeth narrowed her eyes at him, scanning over and making sure that he stood correctly. Okay, she breathed. Shoot. Looking at the target, Percy released the string, and a sharp sound of the arrow flying off into the air and then hitting the target obtusely ran through his ears. Squinting, Percy saw that he had just barely hit the outermost ring. He grinned. Not bad for a first try. Or so he thought. Good, considering a mere 20 minutes ago, you didn't even know how to hold this bow, Annabeth said, with a slight laugh. Percy bowed dramatically. Why, of course. She rolled her eyes at him, and in the blink of an eye shot off an arrow of her own. The whack of an arrow sinking deeply into the target followed, and Percy saw that it was right in the middle. Annabeth rested the bow at her hips. A triumphant smirk adorned her features. Not fair, Percy whined. You've done this before. I haven't. Percy pouted at her. She reached a hand out and patted him on the cheek. I said, not bad for a newbie. Do not fish for compliments, she said. Percy stuck his tongue out at her. Ha ha, joke's on her. Percy grew up fishing. Why are you teaching me this so early? Other things you kind of just threw me into the room with the other princesses and was like, go figure it out. Percy wondered aloud, watching Annabeth hit the center of the target yet again. Because, arrow notched, in front of this princess that you will be meeting, string released, you mustn't seem like your brain is only made out of seaweed and no skills. Bullseye. With a satisfied hum, Annabeth finally put the bow in the case where it had come from and beckoned for Percy to follow her into the castle. And she definitely won't already know that from you calling me seaweed brain, Percy said snarkily. Annabeth snorted. I never call you seaweed brain in front of the royals. That is very unfit and very improper, she said, whacking him on the back of the head. Percy laughed. True, not that I mind. Prince Percy has such a nice ring to it. You should totally call me that more often. It's definitely not the strangest part of my day, Percy said sarcastically. Annabeth pushed him far away with her own shaking laughs. Percy happily came closer and slung an arm around her shoulders, waving hello at the passing staff. Do not act so conceited. I can pull out your hamster tantrum, she said in a warning tone. I would hate it if word were to get out to your future bride. You won't be able to live it down for years, Annabeth continued, in a sing-song voice, grinning devilishly. Percy's expression blanched. Oh God, not the guinea pig story. Please don't, Percy begged, but Annabeth only laughed. When he was a young teenager, 12-ish or maybe 13, he had decided that being a royal prince was rather awful. The memorizing of all the laws, the lessons and manners and politics. It was all boring and traditional and, most of all, elitist. It was later that Percy realized that he could use the power he was born into for the better and make changes to the world. However, at the young age, he had yet to think of that marvelous idea. Instead, he was angry with it all. The pretentious scholars schooling him on classism and the social hierarchy that had way more to do with the economy than it really should have. Strict mentors attempting to push propriety onto him, the self-important nobles who'd come round to try and get into his good graces while disrespecting Annabeth. Percy was so mad. He was furious. He hated it so much, even in the present day, so many years later. The names and faces of those called intellectuals and those self-righteous, respectable nobles could still make his blood boil. A couple, Zeus and Hera, they were the worst. Even thinking of them made his fists clench to punch something. Perhaps the former. They were so rude to Annabeth. Percy had just been so angry with it all. He had a complete and utter meltdown when Annabeth and his parents tried to get him to attend a ball. He screamed and cried out, throwing everything in his room and trashing it horrendously. In shouts, he demanded to be a guinea pig. He swore that being some high-profile prince was awful, and that the life would be so much easier and better if he was just a rodent who only ever ran on wheels and munched on lettuce. It lasted a full hour and a half. His parents and Annabeth had tried calming him down to no avail. Finally, Annabeth had cocooned him in 3 blankets to stop his thrashing around, and he finally wore himself out. Even now, it was one of the most embarrassing events of his life. Well, be good if you don't want anyone else to know, Annabeth teased him. Percy whined and pouted, and in turn Annabeth rolled her eyes and patted his cheek again. Now stop whining. It is unbecoming, she said sternly, contradicting the fond smile on her face. With a sigh, Percy turned towards the incoming carriage. The horses clomped to a stop, and a girl with a near-perfectly settled, deft stare stepped out. She had poise, but also danger looming off of her. He was about to ask Annabeth who this princess was when she opened her mouth and spoke in a curt tone, much like the one that Annabeth spoke in when she was around other royals or nobles. I am Princess Thalia, daughter of King Jupiter, Princess of Olympus. Her electric blue eyes stared down at him intensely. Princess Thalia, he said politely, kissing her knuckles like he did for every other princess. Thalia seemed to have a mass disdain for the jester and pulled her hands away quickly, much to Percy's surprise. A frown came across his face. Why was this princess like this? Princess Thalia, Annabeth spoke. We have an archery practice set up in the courtyard, she said with a slight bow. Percy swore he saw a little smile and laugh appear on Thalia's face. Wonderful, she responded dryly. Annabeth led them to the courtyard. There was a very strange tension in the air. It was as if there were some unspoken words floating through the air, but it wasn't being directed towards him by Annabeth or vice versa. When Annabeth was giving him unspoken words, he could more or less figure out what she was telling him, despite the fact he was obtuse as heck. He could figure it out. It was more so like if Thalia was talking to him without speaking, or talking to Annabeth, but Percy was all in the dark about it. Thank you for coming all this way, Annabeth said, bowing and then leaving. Percy exhaled. The awkward levels raised about 150%. Princess Thalia looked around, inspecting everything and all things, whether it be the targets or Percy himself. The slightest scoff came from him that made him scowl. Done this before? She asked in a pompous voice. Percy looked at her with the slightest of glares. Yes, he said evenly and dangerously. Percy wasn't a rude person, or at least he tried not to be. Too many times he had seen lazy royals do nothing but berate people. However, Thalia's condescending looks and quips were already raking on his nerves. She was perhaps the first princess for Percy to actively dislike. There was something about her that seemed entitled. It didn't feel the same as it did with the other nobles, but it was the closest word he could think of. Percy watched her let go of an arrow. It hit dead center, and with a deadly smile, Thalia let go of the string. Clearly, this was more than just her hobby. This was her domain. The black-haired girl threw him a look. "Next up," she said boredly. Percy gritted together his teeth and fought off the biting comments that would certainly get him in trouble with his parents and 6 feet under by Annabeth. He could already hear the lectures now. The shouting, and the terror that was Annabeth when she was angry. No, furious. With care, Percy aimed and shot the bow. The arrow landed in the yellow, but not dead center like Thalia's. He was deeply torn between the joy of hitting middle and annoyance that would come when Thalia started gloating to him. However, to his surprise, when he turned around, Thalia was looking at him with an approving nod, rather than a condescending one that he was expecting. "Not horrible," she admitted. "But pointers. We're far away. Aim up higher." "Arrows go in a parabola," Thalia said, voice like a coaching trainer training their archers to go to a competition. "Thanks," Percy said gruffly. Thalia looked at him with one raised brow that seemed oddly familiar. "You've got a bite to you," she commented with almost a smirk on her features. This time Percy openly scowled at her, much to her amusement. Odd. "I'm not a fool. I sensed your hatred from the moment I saw you," she said with a laugh. Percy scoffed. "No, you're my favorite person already," he said sarcastically. Thalia flashed a genuine smile and settled her bow on the ground. "You don't need to kiss my feet," she teased. Percy frowned deeper at her. Thalia was certainly an interesting princess, to say the least. And he really didn't like her, but she seemed so familiar in an odd way. "Don't worry your pretty little head about being stuck with me, though," she said, easing the worry out of his head. Not that Percy would ever choose this princess to wed. No, it was more like a background fear that someone was going to force him into it. Even if that were to happen, Percy would probably find a way to escape. "I'm not getting married. Ever," Thalia said flatly. Percy's eyebrows raised in surprise. At his expression, Thalia let out a dry laugh. "I may be the firstborn, but my father is as traditional as they come. Brother, Heracles. He's taking over. And I'd like to join General Artemis's troops," she finished with a wistful look on her face. "Wonderful things I hear from them. Top training, top equipment, a way to save lives. It's all I've ever wanted and more." Thalia let out a sigh. Percy was thoroughly surprised. So he was on this sort of date with the princess who was not ever planning on getting married. But still, Percy wondered, why on earth had she agreed to this? Did she also get forced into it? What on earth was she doing here? And so he voiced them to her, much to her amusement. "Full of questions, are we?" she teased. Percy still glared back, though he sensed less hurt and more joking in her tone than before. Thalia looked off to the castle, as if she saw something or knew something that no one else did. It was strangely reminiscent of the look that Annabeth always had on. "A favor," Thalia said, gently. "For an old friend," she continued. Percy moved his arms and hands in circles. "Do elaborate," he deadpanned. Thalia snickered. "Your overseer, Annabeth, right?" she asked. Percy nodded. "Yep. Best one there ever is or will be," he said proudly. A fond, faraway smile appeared on her face. "No surprise there," she said. "I know her well. Well, knew her. Known her since she was 3. Up until 11, and she moved away to a new kingdom." "Moved away?" "It's kind of an understatement," she explained. Percy felt like someone had just slapped him in the face with an ice cube. Or a fish, which actually had been done before. Annabeth had grown up with this princess? And she didn't tell him? A flash of sadness and betrayal shot through him. On one hand, Percy was annoyed that she never told him where she'd come from and settled for saying that she didn't remember. On the other, Percy understood that Annabeth wanted to keep things to herself. Don't get that way, Thalia snapped, shocking him out of his reverie. She doesn't know either. Her mother had tried sealing her away to a new kingdom. She got lost here. I found out and kept tabs on her. Haven't talked to her in person before last week. It was so surreal. Like, the little girl that I knew was still there, but now she's a mature young woman. I felt proud and old at the same time. Thalia looked down as Percy tried to process. Oh man. He had a lot to tell Annabeth now. And by the sounds of it, Thalia did too. I'm here for 2 reasons. And only those 2. 1, I want to see her again. Even if she doesn't know who I am. Even if she doesn't remember that I was like her big sister growing up and I taught her a lot of the things that she knows and does now. It had just occurred to Percy that it made sense that Thalia seemed so familiar. If Annabeth had picked up on her mannerisms as a kid, he knew them now, and thus would recognize them in Thalia. And second, you both are idiots. Especially you. I have no idea how one could be so oblivious to their own feelings, but you have made that somehow possible. Thalia was a whirlwind, and again, Percy felt like he had been hit in the face with a fish. What? He said. Thalia rolled her eyes. Emotions. Feelings. Love, she commented dryly. Don't think I don't keep track of the 2 of you. You both are so in love with each other, I think it's gone too far, she said with a grimace. And love is stupid in my eyes. Percy shook his head, mouth dribbling out defenses. Thalia didn't take a second to dignify a response to a single one of them. Shut it! Her tone was aggressive and harsh. You are in love with her. Literally the easiest thing to see. All you think about is Annabeth, she said. No, I don't. Yes, you really do. I'm some stranger, and I can see it from a mile away. I'm not even joking. I saw it from a mile away. It was so sweet, it was horrible. Percy swore he heard her say, best friend, and then some muffled word. Look, I don't do feelings, especially with some random prince that I just met. However, this is Annabeth, and despite the gap in time, I want what's best for her, and you seem to be the best option out there. Nice, caring, not a jerk, kind of puppyish, but whoever said loyalty was a bad thing. Anyways, you like her a lot. Try and deny that all you want, but it's not gonna work. Might as well save yourself the trouble and just confess. Percy bit his lip. Thalia was staring at him so intently, so sure of what she was saying, and Percy was really starting to doubt his own statements. You still look unconvinced, Thalia said, with a deadpan tone. She rubbed her temples with a long-suffering sigh. Okay, you know what? What do you think of her? Tell me. How would you describe her? She asked, crossing her arms like it was a dare. Percy looked behind him towards the castle. He could even guess what Annabeth was doing at this moment. She is the smartest person I know. Anything you think she should know, she already knows. No one else is quite like her. She calls all the shots, and if you don't listen to her, well, basically prepare for death. Annabeth, she's really funny. Her humor is dry as sand and basically just different levels of eyebrow raises. Her taste in music is awful, really. It is. but it's so fitting to her. She's the best friend I could ever ask for. I'm sure if some army would try to cross her, she'd end up on top criticizing their fighting techniques. But at the same time, as being terrifyingly scary and dangerously smart, she's also the kindest person I've ever met. I don't think there's been a single time where when we walk past a dog, she didn't drop everything to pet it and say hi. And it's like she could read my mind. She knows exactly what's wrong, and she can fix it quicker than anyone else. It's so hard to totally describe her. There's so much to her. Appearance, personality quirks, all of it. You would never expect Annabeth to be the way that she is. She looks dark and mean and dangerous, like an ice-cold queen or something, but she's so warm. She's so bright. She really is the most wonderful person I've ever met, and a smile from her can make everything so much better. Thalia stared at him at the end of the ramble with the most deadened expression. Will you please just tell her that you were madly in love with her? That was the most awfully romantic thing I've ever heard, and it is nauseating. Percy opened his mouth to retort, but he found himself dry of any. He had basically just spewed out love for Annabeth and was about to add on the fact that she was the most beautiful person he knew. Perhaps he really was in love with her. Oh my God, Percy said in the most quiet of voices. Thalia snorted. There, you finally processed it. Now go, right along, tell her. And invite me to the wedding, please. The place didn't sound so inviting, but Percy nodded and smiled at the odd princess. With a salute, he ran off, shouting thanks to Thalia. He was off to find Annabeth, and was about to tell her that he was in love with her.